Notice something. Have you ever noticed that some people carry the years on their faces and others carry the years in another place, in a place that no one can see from the outside? Scorpio is of the latter type. And no, this isn't just a figure of speech. It's not a cute compliment to end a video. It's a mechanism that no one taught you to see. You look at a 40-year-old Scorpio, and it seems like time has forgotten to pass by them. The skin changes, of course. The body follows the rules of biology. But there's something in their eyes, in their way of being silent, that remains the same. The same as when this person was 20, the same as when they were only 12 way back then. And that bothers people, you know. It bothers those who look, because we were raised to believe that aging is a linear process. You are born, you live, you accumulate wear and tear, and the wear and tear shows. But Scorpio broke that rule at some point in the past, and nobody stopped to ask how. I'll tell you exactly how. Everyone carries a kind of fire within them. The difference lies in what each sign does with that fire. Some let it burn quickly, on the surface, visible, high, and then go out. Others hide the fire so deep that they almost forget it exists. Scorpio does something different from both. Scorpio lets the fire descend to a place that most people are afraid to visit within themselves. And it is precisely there, in that depth, that the secret lies to not aging the way others age. Because aging, in the most painful sense, isn't about wrinkled skin. It's about people who stop feeling. It's about people who protect themselves so much from pain that they also protect themselves from life. And Scorpio, however strange it may seem to an outsider, never learned to do that. He feels too much. He feels too early. He feels too deeply. He feels until it hurts. And it is this refused pain, this pain that he insists on going through instead of circumventing, that keeps something alive inside him that in other people has long since faded. You know the story of the phoenix, don't you? Everyone knows it, but nobody stops to think about its most important detail. The phoenix doesn't age because it never truly reaches its end. It burns before it gets there. It turns to ash precisely at the moment it should begin to decay, and from the midst of that ash is born another version of itself, more raw, more truthful, without the layers that no longer served its purpose. This isn't a pretty myth for a tattoo. This is the exact portrait of what happens inside a Scorpio, more than once in their life, sometimes more than once a decade. While other signs keep their old selves like people store old furniture in the attic, afraid to throw them away, Scorpio burns the whole attic down, without mercy. And that's why they never get old on the inside, because they never let things accumulate enough to rot. They destroy them first. But this is where things get really uncomfortable, because this process, this burning and restarting, is something no one consciously chooses. It happens on its own, within crises that seem like pure destruction while they're unfolding. Losses, ruptures, silences that last for months, an almost physical desire to disappear. And it's precisely in these moments, the ones that seem most like aging, the ones that seem most like wear and tear, that Scorpio is actually doing the opposite. It's rejuvenating itself from within, in the darkness, unseen by anyone. So I ask, what if what you've always called a crisis is, in reality, the only reason you still have that flame burning that others have already lost? And perhaps this question is bothering you right now, deep down, because you already know the answer, but you've never had the courage to face it head on. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose isn't a generic self-help manual full of ready-made phrases to post on social media. It functions as an invitation to delve deeper into what Scorpio already does instinctively, but almost never consciously, traversing their own darkness instead of running from it, understanding their own fire instead of trying to extinguish it. It's a mental attitude, a different way of facing each crisis that arises, transforming what seemed like destruction into direction. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you recognized this pattern. Perhaps you're going through one of those moments right now. A silence, a loss, a desire to disappear that feels like the end. But maybe it's the opposite. This still present discomfort is proof that the flame continues to burn. And it's while it burns that it makes sense to understand where to direct that fire before the moment passes. The link is in the first pinned comment. But be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. Now, let us know in the comments. At what stage of your life did you feel this fire destroy and recreate you at the same time? And while that question still echoes, let me show you something you may never have noticed about yourself. Some people avoid the mirror because they're afraid of seeing time passing on their skin. Scorpio avoids the mirror for another reason, because every now and then in the reflection they recognize a version of themselves that no longer exists, a version they themselves burned away long ago. And that, for them, is more frightening than a wrinkle. Imagine a blacksmith's furnace. The metal enters raw, cold, without any decent shape. But to become a blade, it needs to be thrown directly into the highest fire in the workshop. It needs to melt before it can be shaped. No other tool in the workshop goes through this. The others are sanded, polished on the outside, a gentler, slower, more visible process. Only the blade needs to truly melt from the inside to come out stronger on the other side. Scorpio is the blade of the Zodiac workshop, and nobody ever told you that. Except there's a troubling detail in this furnace. It doesn't warn you when it's going to ignite. It simply ignites, usually at a stage where everything seemed stable, in a relationship that seemed solid, in a job that seemed secure, in a version of yourself that you thought you had finally accepted. And suddenly, without warning, it all crumbles from the inside. And from the outside, those who look call it a crisis. They call it instability. They even call it drama. But why is it that just when everything seems calm, the fire decides to reignite? The answer has to do with something most people have never learned to do, to feel without becoming obsolete in the process. Most signs, when the pain becomes too great, learn to distance themselves from it. They rationalize, minimize, move on, pretending everything is fine, and this is a valid strategy. It works for survival. But it comes at a cost. Every time someone does this, a small part of their capacity to feel is locked away. And over time, locked away so many times, it simply ceases to exist. That's what ages you from the inside. It's not time, it's the accumulation of closed doors. Scorpio never learned to close those doors properly. He tries, many times in his life, he tries to shield himself, to stay cold, to distance himself, and he even succeeds for a while. But there always comes a moment when the door cracks, and when it cracks, everything comes in at once, the old pain, the new pain, all mixed together, and that's when it seems like he's crumbling. But in reality, it's the furnace being lit again. It's the blade returning to the fire to emerge sharper. Have you ever noticed how, after one of these phases, the Scorpio who emerges on the other side is always quieter, more selective about who they let in, harder to deceive? This is no coincidence. This is the direct result of having gone through the fire instead of skirting it. And each time this happens, something inside them becomes younger, not older, because they have discarded a layer that no longer served them. A version of themselves that was, let's say, half dead inside. And there's another detail that almost no one notices in this process. A true blacksmith never fears returning to the fire because he knows that the blade only loses value if it's kept untouched, unused, without being sharpened again. It's the same with Scorpio. The people who fear aging the most tend to be those who try hardest to remain untouched, to protect themselves from any change, to keep the same version of themselves for as long as possible. Scorpio does the opposite, almost unintentionally. He allows himself to change again and again, and it is precisely this willingness to become something else that prevents him from becoming an old, stored, forgotten piece on a shelf. This furnace that ignites without warning, this blade that needs to melt to become stronger, is exactly the kind of process that no one can go through alone without some guidance. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose fits perfectly into this. It doesn't teach you to avoid the fire. It teaches you to recognize the right moment to cross it instead of running away, transforming each crack into direction instead of pure destruction. For a sign that already melts by nature, having a map for this journey changes everything. The last copies are running out, and this content may be taken down at any moment. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. Now I need to show you the other side of that same coin, because there's something that confuses a lot of people who live with Scorpios. On the outside, they seem like the most intense sign of the zodiac. Jealous, possessive, dramatic, they say. But nobody notices that all this intensity hides something almost the opposite, an enormous capacity to stand still, quiet, waiting, doing absolutely nothing visible. While inside they're processing an entire storm. Imagine a dam. From the outside, the water seems calm, still, almost boringly still, but behind that concrete, there's a gigantic pressure being contained, second after second, without ever stopping. The dam isn't weak because it's still. It's exactly the opposite. It's the strongest structure there because it can hold back what would destroy anything more fragile. Scorpio functions like an emotional dam. It holds back feelings that other signs could never contain without exploding on the first day. But a dam has a limit. And when that limit is reached, nobody sees it coming, because from the outside, everything remained calm until the very second before. That's why, when Scorpio finally speaks what it has been holding back for months, sometimes years, it seems like an attack out of nowhere to those on the other side. But it's not out of nowhere. It's the dam that has been at its limit for a long time, and nobody realized how much pressure was being contained in silence. And why does he hold on for so long before letting it out? Because speaking up too soon seems dangerous to Scorpio. They learned at some point, they don't even remember exactly, that showing their true intensity scares people, pushes them away, and makes them seem too difficult to deal with. So they develop an almost automatic mechanism of restraint. They hold back, observe, wait, gauge the situation, and only release it when they have no other choice. And here's the detail nobody tells you. This mechanism, which seems like a flaw, is actually one of the reasons why they don't age internally the same way others do. Because while many people learn to diminish what they feel until they almost feel nothing anymore, Scorpio never diminishes. They only delay. And delayed feeling is still a whole feeling, kept with the same intensity as the first day. This means that decades later, they are still able to feel with the same force as when they were 20 years old, because they never learned to numb their own capacity to feel. And it is precisely this intact capacity that keeps something visibly more alive in them than in people who, on the outside, seem younger. Some people mistake this for stubbornness, or even for difficulty evolving emotionally. But a dam that holds back so much water isn't stubborn, it's structural. It was built to withstand exactly that much pressure. And every time someone tries to rush Scorpio to let it go before the right time, what happens in practice is the opposite of what's expected. The dam holds back even more strongly because it feels its own rhythm is being disrespected. It's only when Scorpio itself decides that the time has come, that the floodgates open, and then what was contained becomes a force of movement instead of a force of destruction. Holding things in for so long comes at a price, and no one taught you how to deal with it properly. The difference between holding on until you explode and holding on with purpose lies in understanding your own mechanism before it decides for you. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose works precisely on this. How to recognize the right moment to release what you've been holding on to without waiting for the limit to arrive on its own. For those who carry as much emotional pressure as Scorpio, this is more than self-knowledge. It's true relief. Access is limited and may be taken down soon. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. Now comes the part that usually bothers people the most, because it touches on a very specific place. There's an old, somewhat forgotten theory that says each person carries within themselves two ages at the same time, the age of the body and the age of the soul. In most signs, these two ages move more or less together, aging at the same pace, somewhat slowly, somewhat combined. In Scorpio, they separate early. The soul matures too quickly, often even in childhood, while the body follows its own slower, more predictable calendar. That's why so many Scorpios report the same strange feeling, that of having felt old inside from a very young age. A child who observed adults with a seriousness that didn't match their age. A teenager who already understood things that their peers would take years to understand. And the curious thing is that this precocious maturity, which seemed like a burden at the time, is precisely what guarantees the opposite effect later. Since the soul has aged early and quickly, it reaches a kind of plateau, and the body, decades later, is still trying to reach that maturity that the soul already had long ago. Imagine a very deep body of water, the kind that seems to have no visible end. On the surface, the water heats up and cools down with the weather, reacting quickly to every temperature change. But deep down, where light barely reaches, the temperature remains practically the same all year round, protected from the variations above. Scorpio lives like that on the inside. Its surface reacts, oscillates, adapts to what is around it. But deep down, there is a part that remains at the same temperature from a very young age, protected, immune to the wear and tear that punishes the surface of others. And here lies the most uncomfortable paradox of all. The more someone tries to understand Scorpio only superficially, the more unpredictable, contradictory, and difficult to decipher they seem. But those who understand that there is this deep, protected, constant water beneath, also understand why they manage to weather decades of losses, disappointments, and new beginnings without what truly matters to them being eroded. Have you ever noticed that even after everything you've been through, there's still a part of you that reacts to things with the same intensity as years ago? That still gets emotional, still gets hurt, still falls in love with the force of someone who never truly learned to shield themselves? Well, that's not immaturity. It's living proof that the deep water is still down there, untouched, refusing to cool down the way the world tried to teach it. And perhaps this explains why so many Scorpios report feeling like they're around younger people who already seem tired of life, exhausted before their time, while they, even after experiencing great losses, still find a reason to throw themselves into something again. It's not luck. It's because that deep layer was never corroded by the variations on the surface. It remained there, preserved, as a reserve of life for when the rest of the body is no longer in such a hurry to keep believing. This deep water that never cools is rare, and few people know how to nurture it without drowning in the process. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose helps precisely with this. It shows how to protect this deep and constant part of yourself without needing to harden the surface to survive. For Scorpio, who already feels everything with this intensity from an early age, this means stopping blaming themselves for feeling too much and starting to use this depth as a direction. Stock is running low, and content may be removed at any time. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. So let's go back to the initial question. Why doesn't Scorpio age like the other signs? Because it never chose the easy path of simply enduring. It chose, without even realizing it was choosing, the most difficult path of recreating itself. Repeatedly, in silence. Without applause, without anyone seeing the entire process, only the result on the other side, someone who continues to feel with the same intensity as always, while so many people around have already learned to feel less in order to suffer less. This comes at a cost, it's true. No one crosses furnaces, dams, and deep water without bearing any scars. But there's a huge difference between aging through wear and tear and aging through depth. The first type fades, the second type accumulates layers. Like a wine that becomes more complex with time, never weaker, only denser, rarer, harder to imitate. Perhaps that's why decades later, a Scorpio can still look someone in the eye and see truths that most prefer not to see. Can still feel a loss with the same pain as years ago, and a love with the same fire as when it all began. Not because time hasn't passed, but because deep down they found a way to burn without going out. And perhaps that's the quietest beauty of the entire zodiac, the existence of a sign that stubbornly refuses to become definitive ashes, always choosing at the end of each cycle to be reborn once more.